The prosecutors are done talking. After weeks of witness testimony, secret deals, emotional breakdowns, and jaw-dropping accusations, they've officially rested their case against Sean "Diddy" Combs. And now, everything shifts. This isn't just about what Diddy did or didn't do, it's about whether the jury sees a pattern or a lifestyle, a system or coincidence. The defense is already on the attack, saying this was just a celebrity living his private life, not a mastermind running an illegal operation. But the government says otherwise. They've painted a picture of control, silence, and loyalty, where everyone had a role, whether they realized it or not. And with RICO on the table, it only takes 2 acts to connect the dots. Everyone's been talking about the odds of what's going to happen in court, like it's a game in Vegas. People are placing their guesses, and let's just say, some of the experts have already locked in their predictions. And honestly, they're making a lot of sense. Right now, it looks like the smaller charges are basically a done deal, kind of like the low-hanging fruit. But when you get into the bigger stuff, like the complicated RICO charges, that's where things get messy. Even if the defense tries to twist the story or poke holes in one witness's credibility, especially Jane's, they really don't need her alone to make the case stick. That's what makes it tricky. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Let's say someone on the jury doesn't believe Jane's side of the story. In this case, unlike others, you can sort of separate her from the rest of it. That's not usually how it works. Most of the time, all the witnesses are connected like puzzle pieces. But here, you could slice her part out and still have a strong case based on the other witnesses, even those with hazy memories or messy pasts. The prosecutors could actually end up with a clearer closing argument that way. Can jurors talk about the case day by day? Officially, no. They're supposed to wait until they're in the deliberation room. That's when they take an oath and start actually discussing who did what and why. But in real life, jurors are human. People whisper, they have side chats, they form little mini-groups. One group's over here debating, another group's over there trading thoughts. Eventually, all those mini-convos start bubbling up into the bigger group conversation. And now, timing-wise, this just got even hotter. CNN just reported that the prosecution in the Sean Combs trial has rested their case. That's right, it's done. One of the prosecutors even said in court, "We're finished, except for a few cleanups." So, what now? One of Diddy's lawyers, Mark Agnifilo, was asked if they're ready to move forward. Then his other lawyer, Alexandra Shapiro, jumped in and asked the judge to throw the whole case out under Rule 29. Basically, she's saying, "Hey, judge, don't even send this to the jury. There's nothing for them to decide. The prosecution didn't prove anything." Her argument? The charges don't meet the mark, especially the big RICO ones. She's claiming there's no real proof of a team-up or plan to do shady stuff. Things like forced labor, shady money moves, and the rest of the list. But here's the kicker. When it comes to those serious charges, the government doesn't actually have to show that Diddy personally did those acts. They just have to prove that he was part of a bigger plan where at least 2 of those actions were supposed to happen, or did happen. And now it becomes a game of definition. Like, what does agreement even mean? Do people have to sit down and shake hands in a dark room and say, "Let's do this"? Or is it enough if it looks like they're all moving in the same direction? All right, let's talk about how this whole agreement thing works in court, especially when you're dealing with a case as big and messy as this one. So, think about it like this. When the same people keep doing the same shady stuff over and over, it's not just random anymore. It starts to look like a plan. And that's what the prosecutors are saying here. Take Christina Coram, for example. She didn't just help once. She allegedly booked flights again and again for certain guests. She made sure the vibes were set just how Diddy liked them. Everything from the mood to the extras. When Cassie got overwhelmed and tried to leave, Christina was there to step in and calm things down. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. So when the defense team says there's no real conspiracy, the prosecution fires back. Look at all the moving parts. It wasn't just one mistake or one-time thing, this was organized. If there's even a chance the jury could see it that way, then the judge has to let the case move forward. That's how the law works. Now, Diddy's lawyer, Shapiro, is pushing back hard. She's saying that the group of people involved doesn't even count as a proper enterprise under RICO law. She compared it to something called a rimless hub, basically saying everyone's doing their own thing and it's not a tightly run operation. But then Afi jumps in with a different take. She says you don't need to be part of a company or wear a badge to be in the group. If you're helping out in a way that keeps the whole system running, even if you're not official, you're still part of it. That includes staff, assistants, even artists like Cassie or Jane, who were signed to his label. If your job connects you to the larger plan, you're in. And about the idea of a conspiracy, most people think it has to be like a movie scene. You know, people in a dark room shaking hands and making a deal, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic. You can have a silent understanding. Like if someone always books the hotel, someone else always handles the flights, and someone else keeps the guests in check, well, that's teamwork. Quiet teamwork, but still teamwork. And Jane's testimony? Whether or not you fully believe her, what it shows is that Diddy's system didn't just appear overnight. Over time, he got smarter, more organized. By the time Jane came into the picture, everybody already knew their roles. They didn't need instructions. They just did what they knew needed to be done. That's how smooth the machine had become. Now, for the latest update, Diddy's defense is still saying there's no solid proof of a 20-year-long master plan. They're saying, hey, just because people worked for him doesn't mean they were doing anything illegal together. They claim there's no hard evidence of a real agreement, just some loose connections. But then Jeremy brings up a strong counterpoint. He says, look, Diddy was the one who benefited from all of this. He was the center of it. If the people around him were flying folks in, organizing parties, or paying folks to keep certain videos quiet, then yeah, that looks like a system built for him. Whether or not each worker knew what the others were doing, they all had the same goal, to keep the machine running and to keep Diddy happy. He compares it to cases where people are just told to drop off cash. They might not know the whole plan, but their actions still make them part of it. That's how prosecutors are trying to frame this. Diddy didn't need to do everything himself. He just needed to be the one everyone was working for. Now, this is where the arguments are starting to heat up, because we're finally seeing how all the pieces of this puzzle are being used to support or tear down the main charges. Think of it like the preview before the big final battle. Both sides are starting to reveal what their closing arguments might sound like. Let's look at what Diddy's attorney, Shapiro, is saying. She's basically claiming that a lot of what happened was just personal stuff. According to her, it wasn't a criminal setup, it was just Diddy living his celebrity lifestyle. She said people used personal items like baby oil and certain accessories. Some drinks were involved, maybe some substances too, but nothing that proves a serious crime. She said folks like Jonathan Perez or Brendan Paul described these hotel nights as private moments, not work events. Even Cassie and Jane's involvement with other people wasn't something organized by his team. It was just something that happened naturally and brought them emotionally closer to Diddy. In other words, Shapiro is trying to paint this as a celebrity being wild in his private life, not someone running a coordinated criminal plan. But Melba jumps in and says, hold on, that doesn't match the evidence we've heard. She reminds everyone of the security guard who testified about a moment at a hotel where a tape was quietly traded for cash right in front of bodyguards. And those bodyguards? They weren't just random friends. They were employees of Diddy's actual business. Then there's Christina Coram. Again, not a personal assistant, but the chief of staff. She was the one booking flights, handling logistics, and keeping things running. That kind of organization? It's not casual. That looks like a system. And the defense is clearly trying to spin it. They want people to believe these assistants and insiders were just bystanders, not involved. But the prosecution argues differently. They say everyone had a role, and everyone knew what was going on, even if they didn't talk about it out loud. Now, let's pause for a moment, because someone dropped a funny question during the broadcast. They asked, can Johnson & Johnson sue Diddy for ruining baby oil for everybody? And Afi, one of the speakers, ran with it. She joked that even if Diddy loses this case, Johnson & Johnson is winning, because now everybody knows just how much he used their product. Like, that's a 20-year unpaid ad campaign from a billionaire. Jeremy then chimed in, laughing but serious, saying the real forgotten brand in all this is Astroglide. While baby oil gets all the headlines, nobody's talking about the other product. As a joke, he claimed to be their lawyer and said they should also be sending Diddy a thank you check. Now, back to the serious part. The question was raised. Is having all that stuff, baby oil, other materials, just weird? Or is it actually part of the pattern the prosecution is trying to prove? Could it show intent? Could it suggest someone was trying to make sure these parties never missed a beat? At one point, people even wondered if there was something hidden inside those bottles, like maybe they were used to sneak in something stronger, but that was quickly shut down. Even Cassie reportedly said that theory wasn't true. Still, the volume of it all, the obsession with having it in stock, might point to how organized things were behind the scenes. Then a viewer asked another really smart question. Do defense attorneys use the same tactics over and over? Because it kind of feels like they do, and Jeremy explained it like this. There's no single formula that works every time, but there is a general strategy. You pick the one or two facts that help your case, and you repeat them over and over. You look for anything that creates doubt, whether it's someone's sketchy memory, a confusing timeline, or a contradiction in testimony, and you use that to break down the rest of the story. That's exactly what Diddy's defense is doing. For example, they argue that Christina Coram didn't even know what was really happening. They say she was just following orders, and Diddy might have even lied to her. Same with KK, one of the supposed key players. She didn't show up until 12 years into this whole timeline. So how could she be part of a 20-year plan? Then there's the question of perjury. Did one of the witnesses lie? The defense tried to claim someone wasn't telling the truth, but Melba made it clear. Whatever mistake may have happened, it wasn't shown to the jury. And even if a timeline was a little off, that doesn't mean the story itself is fake. Trauma can blur memories. Drug use can affect recall, but it doesn't mean nothing happened. At this point in the trial, both sides are laying all their cards on the table. We're hearing what the defense is really going to say during closing arguments, and it's giving us a preview of how they plan to spin the whole case. Shapiro, Diddy's lawyer, is arguing that there's a gap in the timeline. She points out that after Diddy and Cassie broke up in 2018, nothing new shows up until Jane comes into the picture in 2021. Her message? If this is really a long-running conspiracy, where's the connection in those years between? And remember KK? The woman many thought would be the star co-conspirator? Shapiro says she only popped up briefly and wasn't even called to testify. Which begs the question, do you even need a main partner in crime to prove a case like this? Afi jumps in to clarify. You don't need a full squad. A few people helping out can still count as a conspiracy. Sure, having someone like KK on the stand might have added drama, but she's not essential to the whole structure. Especially since the charges go beyond one category. You've got accusations ranging from moving people around for shady purposes, to bribes, to even property damage. Then, Afi, never one to miss a moment, brings us back to the infamous baby oil and Astroglide convo. Let's be real, she says. What was it even for? Jane and Cassie weren't asked on the stand about it, so no one really knows. Her theory? These women weren't close enough to Diddy's private routines to know his solo habits. But let's face it, most people think it wasn't for dry elbows. Whether it was for his freak-off lifestyle or something less exciting, the defense says, okay, sure, but that doesn't make it a crime. As the trial keeps unfolding, someone tosses out a big question. Who's going to deliver Diddy's closing statement? That's huge. A good closing can flip a whole case. Melba says it could be Tenny Garagos, who's led the charge on cross-examinations, or maybe Brian Steele, the guy known for flair, swagger, and courtroom showmanship. They'll want their MVP in that spotlight, no doubt. Then we get more updates from court. Shapiro's now trying to block parts of the case from even reaching the jury. She's saying things like, well, yeah, Diddy may have tried to keep things private, but that doesn't mean he broke the law. For instance, let's talk about that hotel incident involving Eddie Garcia, the security guard. Prosecutors say Diddy paid him to hand over video footage of something serious between him and Cassie. That alone could count as witness tampering or bribery. But Shapiro's defense? Garcia said the payment was just for the video, and Cassie didn't even want it reported to police. So, no harm, no foul. But Jeremy's not buying that at all. He says there's no counter-narrative, no explanation for why this guard was basically pressured into keeping things quiet. And it's not the only time Diddy tried to sweep things under the rug. This kind of cover-up behavior might be a big reason why Diddy won't take the stand. Because once he does, all those incidents come back to haunt him under cross-examination. And if Diddy stays silent? The defense has more freedom to spin the story without being tied down by his exact words. Then we get a new twist. Shapiro says Diddy was just trying to avoid bad press. Not because he did anything wrong, but because he didn't want his name and Cassie's drama out in public. They say Cassie didn't want it reported either, and even the guard, Garcia, said he wasn't threatened. He just took the cash for the footage. But Melba says, nope. Let's look at the situation. Garcia had no lawyer in that room. He was flanked by 2 massive bodyguards with a money counter running. That's not a normal contract negotiation. That's pressure. That's get this over with before something worse happens energy. You can't just brush that off by saying, yeah, oh, well, the contract let him call the police. That's not how real people act when they're scared. Same thing with Cassie. Saying she chose not to go to the cops ignores the bigger picture. When someone's in a controlling or emotionally abusive relationship, their decisions can't always be taken at face value. And Jeremy wraps it up perfectly. He says the prosecution doesn't need to do too much convincing at this point. They've brought plenty of witnesses, they've laid out the facts. Sure, the defense tried to poke holes in Jane and Cassie's stories, but there are some parts of the case no one's arguing about. Things like flying people in for questionable reasons or organizing private meetups in hotel rooms. That's the part the jury's going to remember. Even if they're confused about all the legal lingo around racketeering, the basics are clear, and that might be enough. So, at the end of the day, this trial isn't just about flashy headlines, celebrity gossip, or the mountain of baby oil jokes. It's about whether a jury believes that all of these scattered pieces form a bigger picture. Was Diddy just a wild celebrity living out his own lifestyle, or was he quietly running something deeper, something that crossed the line into a criminal operation? The defense says no. It was all personal, misunderstood, or exaggerated. But the prosecution believes they've shown a pattern, a plan, and a purpose. Now it's up to the jury to decide which version of the truth sticks.